Now, data has become ever more important in industry, but oil and gas struggles to really love its data. And so today, what I want to do is encourage you in your careers to love your data. There is a compelling business case in oil and gas to love data, especially in energy. And it doesn't matter whether your career is going to be in a data field or if you focus on in the industry itself, as I did, you'll still benefit. Of course, as just mentioned, I'm an author and a speaker on the impacts of digital innovation on oil and gas. As was mentioned, my first book is called Bits, Bytes, and Barrels. And what it does is it sets out the business case for embracing digital in oil and gas. The industry's clearly gotten the memo here because it is now furiously deploying digital solutions throughout the sector. My latest book is called Carbon, Capital, and the Cloud, and it presents the best practices for implementing digital in oil and gas. And the book outlines at least 35 specific practices that work. If you're wondering about how to buy my books, I can tell you the very best way is in large quantities. I joined this industry in 1984 with Imperial Oil in Toronto, and that was over 4 decades ago, if you can believe that. Of course, I started working in oil and gas when I was just 6. And at Imperial Oil, though, I only lasted 3 years. It was at my second annual performance review that my supervisor sat me down and thanked me for my service, but then said, in our opinion, you're not going to amount to very much. Now, that really hurt because obviously just starting out. What they actually said, though, was that since I wasn't an engineer, I was not qualified and wouldn't be trusted to supervise any of Imperial Oil's energized assets. And that's sort of fair. But I'd also say that's fairly typical oil company behavior. They were precisely correct with the facts, but way off in their predictions. And so I quit and tried my hand in consulting, where promotions and pay raises were much more common. A decade later, I found myself living here in Hong Kong, but I was working principally in mainland China. Back then, China was very primitive. This was a picture I took at Tiananmen Square. As you can see, clogged with bicycles, but no cars, very few trucks. And this was a first clue to me that I might find myself working in energy again. One of my first trips in the country took me here to a place called Baicheng. This is a village, city, of 2 million people in Jilin province, north of North Korea. And while I was there, I took this picture. Again, you take a look at the streets. You can see lots of bicycles and people on foot, no cars, no trucks. And if you look really closely, you can see donkey carts delivering coal door to door. Donkey carts. So this is a 1994. I don't know where you were all in 1994, but donkey carts, billion people, and this is how they got their energy supply. Well, obviously, I concluded that there was going to be a huge future in coal and donkey carts. For a while, anyway. Well, that's not accurate. I thought I'd come back to North America and focus on the oil and gas industry, which is what I did. And I stayed there ever since. One of the reasons why I work in oil and gas and why I stay here is because with oil, we can do real work. A barrel of oil contains anywhere up to 6.1 gigajoules of energy, according to the Energy Information Administration. Was there a question? No? I'll keep going. So what does this mean in human terms? Well, a frontline oil worker, like a roughneck on a rig, they produce anywhere between 300 and 600 kilocalories of energy output per hour, just doing work, turning wrenches, driving vehicles. So let's say 450, just to take the average. The conversion factor of kilocalories and joules is 4,184 joules per kilocalorie. So a barrel of oil contains about 3,000 hours of work at 450 kilocalories per hour. This equates to about 1.5 years of work for a human at 8 hours per day. On a per capita basis, Americans, your country, consume 23 barrels of oil per person per year. Now, 5 of those barrels are for plastics and paints and materials, but the balance is fuel. Now, what this means is that every single American has an 18-person fossil fuel servant army. It's made up of tractors and trucks and airplanes and engines. And they're doing all of this work for us. Every single person has an 18-person army. So a family of 3 has 54 servant engines working for them. Their sole purpose is to serve us. If we were ancient Egyptians, we're living like pharaohs with 53 slaves. The growth of this, what I call the fossil fuel servant army, is not over yet either. Just consider this. Asia Pac, the countries here in red, so that's India, China, Pakistan, they all consume the same amount of energy as the OECD countries do, but just a third as much on a per capita basis. Africa is even less, it's just 8%. What this means is that these countries could double the size of their fossil fuel servant armies, and they still won't even approach our standard of living. And this is why countries like China and India continue to build coal plants and oil and gas facilities and refineries and pipelines. All they want at the end is what we have, which is to have their children learn to read so they can create for themselves a better future. They want their farmers to get off of oxen and onto tractors because this helps improve their food security. They want their women not to have to haul water from the well back to the village. Asian and African consumers will not be denied, and they're not going to be told that they can't have their fossil fuel servants like we have, and their governments are not going to relent. This is why I stay in oil and gas. Fossil fuels have made the world for us a better, safer, and more productive place. And 2/3 of the planet wants the exact same freedom that energy provides. But I would say this, times are changing. I don't know if you've ever heard this expression, data is the new oil or data is the new crude oil, but it's very popular these days. You'd think it was invented by some industry expert, Daniel Yergin, say. Daniel is the chairman of Cambridge Energy Research Associates, and he's his company that runs CERAWeek in Houston every year. You might think maybe it's someone who's good with a turn of phrase, like Taylor Swift, perhaps. But you'd be pretty incorrect. It was actually coined, hard to believe this, 20 years ago, in 2006, by this guy, Clive Humby, a British mathematician. I didn't know the British could do math. I thought as a Canadian they specialized in colonialism. But it was Clive who first declared that data was the new oil. Even The Economist magazine, back in 2017, declared that data was more valuable than oil. And to add to the insult, the cover had the audacity to put these digital companies on top of these offshore oil platforms. I mean, as if. These platforms were never built to hold the immense weight of Jeff Bezos' ego. And Elon Musk proves that digital companies are not intrinsically safe. Just look at Grok and its crazy output. Of course, what Clive and The Economist were referring to was the ridiculous stock price valuations that are now given over to the digital companies. Alphabet, Amazon, Apple, Meta, Microsoft, and NVIDIA. These companies on February 29th, just yesterday when I did the lookup, they were valued at $21.7 trillion, these 6 companies. Imagine that. You're a nerd in high school and you're a trillionaire by the time you're 35. According to the business research company, the global oil and gas industry, the oil and gas industry I work in, will be worth just $8.7 trillion by 2027. That's it. And that includes all companies. Exxon, Chevron, Shell, and the entire supply chain. And that doesn't make any sense. But the point that Clive was trying to make was that data is an immensely valuable commodity now in its own right. And our industry, the oil and gas industry, we are absolutely champion at generating data. But using data, valuing that data, not so much. But our ability as an industry, if we wish to exploit AI to avoid hallucinating and making errors, it means we have to rethink our relationship with our data. But when we do, we stand to gain hugely by combining our energy infrastructure with this enormous data generating capacity. It turns out it was an Australian company, Woodside Energy, actually, based in Perth, that first figured out that there was value in data. Way back in 2016, 10 years after Clive announced that oil was the new, data was the new oil, Woodside loaded 32 years of engineering data into an AI engine. Now, of course, you know what I'm talking about here. Engineering studies, process documents, safety audits, environmental reviews, financial results, costings, spreadsheets, text diagrams, P&IDs, PDFs, maps, all match. The AI engine they chose was the one that was available at the time called Watson, which is produced by IBM. Of course, you know what IBM stands for. Inadequate, but marketable. I'm just kidding. IBM's doing very well of late. Well, Watson was an early version of ChatGPT. Engineers could pose natural language questions to Watson and get an instant response, such as, when was this blowout preventer last installed? What's the procedure for shutting down this particular pump? What's the optimal crewing level for the platform during this incoming storm? And of course, what's for lunch today? Very important in the lunchroom. Woodside claimed, 2016, that they saved fully 40% of total engineering time by doing this. 40%. Just let that sink in. No more time spent tracking down prior studies, no more time spent reading through them and looking for the answer. Now, this raised a lot of serious questions, frankly, starting with the quality of Australian engineers, though. But it was a complete game changer for Woodside. Complete. 40% means you have more engineers than you need for the work you're doing today, but that also means you have the capacity to grow the company without actually needing to hire yet more people. For some reason, though, no one else in industry followed Woodside. No one. 10 years after Clive declared it and Woodside proved it, no one else at that time considered that data was the new oil. So why is that? Well, as it turns out, and you probably all know, extracting value from data is really hard work. Data is incredibly diverse. It comes in all of these different formats and from so many different sources. It's pixels and cameras now, it's money, it's images, it's sounds, it's documents, it's readings. And of course, inside a computer, it's just zeros and ones. It's hard to differentiate one from the other. Data can be infinitely and instantly duplicated with absolutely no controls. Keeping a grip on the provenance of data takes real work. Virtually every screen on every computer where you have data, spreadsheets, a document, there will be a share button or a make a copy button. Data wants to be copied. And the companies that sell the technology want us to copy the data. They make money when we do that. So it's built into the system. But this duplication creates real challenges because we can't keep track of provenance. Where is truth? And now data is unbelievably abundant. It is what we call super abundant. If you wanted to watch all the videos now on YouTube, you'd probably, well, at a minimum, you'd need 17,000 years. And some estimates are now at 300,000 years just to watch all the videos. If you did that, you'd have no time to watch TikTok, pretty sure. We upload 5 billion photos to the cloud every single day. Most of them pictures of cats. In fact, this cat. All of this data generation, all of this copying and duplicating isn't very capital intense, as it turns out, at the pixel level. A mobile phone with a camera sensor and a network connection, $500? That's how much it costs to kind of generate data. The cost per data byte is practically zero. And these individual bits of data are themselves not very valuable. How much would you pay for a pixel from a photo of an oil gauge? Like, not a lot. One of my idiot countrymen, though, did drop $1.3 million on an NFT of a bored ape, only to see it fall in value to $60,000. Way to go, Justin. You're the man. So, we have lots of data. It's growing all the time. It's all just zeros and ones, and much of it is what we call rot, redundant, obsolete, trivial. What distinguishes data is context. Context for data is everything. A few years ago, I helped a ground transportation company based in the oil sands in northern Alberta equip its buses with GPS and Wi-Fi. You know how with Uber, like you order an Uber cab and you can see the car driving around on the map? Well, we wanted to do the same thing with these buses. That way the employees who were waiting for the bus would know when it was going to arrive. So that day we switched the system on, we called the CEO over and we said, hey, take a look. And you could see on the map all the 750 buses all driving around. And he immediately pointed to one particular bus and said to us, what is that bus doing there? Well, alarm bells went off. We had no idea where the bus actually was. Like, we weren't from Fort McMurray. Like, how would we know? Did he drive off the road? Was he even on the map? Here we were with all of this data. We're generating all of this data. We're putting it on the map, and we had no context to be able to interpret it correctly. But the CEO, he knew exactly where that driver was with that bus because he knew the map. Context is everything. Are you wondering where the driver was, just out of curiosity? He was buying donuts at the local mall. He was driving, get this, a 40-foot long, 12-foot tall, 25-ton bus, and he decided to take it to the donut drive-through to get coffee and a donut. And he had wedged the bus in under the canopy. That's a candidate for what we call Canada's worst driver. And so we have a whole TV show dedicated to people like this. The trick with data is how do you keep the context along with that data? Right now it gets trapped in people's heads. Just a little story. My wife and I have accumulated lots of paper photographs over the years. Unlike you guys, we grew up with cameras that you had to take the film and get it developed. We had 6,000 paper photos. I have no context for any of these. Where were they taken? Who is this person? What was the event that was going on? Why? What was happening here? My wife remembers every detail, every single photo. She can tell you who was in it, why they were there, where it was taken, time of day, the event, what was significant, why this photo. She had the context. That context is trapped in our heads and it doesn't move along with the data. It's not metadata that we can keep. Turns out that in industry, capturing this context and moving it around with our data, really hard to do. Really hard. If we knew how to do this, we'd have done it by now. So, context is everything. Everything has a context. Let's just consider how the context for energy, our world, is changing right now. The value chains in energy are changing dramatically. What I would call the natural gas value chain, gas production through gas treatment into gas pipelines to utilities, the petroleum chain, the energy chain, power generation, distribution, transmission. These chains all used to be segregated, but I don't know if you've noticed, they're starting to become blended. Prices of natural gas are now a determinant of the price of power. It used to be that the price of power was determined by the price of coal, but no longer. People who buy natural gas for power are now competing with people who buy natural gas for plastics. So these chains are becoming integrated. You know what is segregated until it's not? Eggs. The shell, the white, and the yolk, separate. If oil and gas liked eggs for breakfast, we'd all want it over easy, where you get the pieces all separated. But we can't have it that way anymore. We're going to have to get used to scrambled. Our energy products are diversifying. Renewables take all the growth now in the energy industry. And for the first time in a very long time, forever, they now take up over half of the global investment. This is very much like when streaming music started competing with CD music, and you know who won that battle. The waste products are changing. Produced water, carbon dioxide, vented methane, these things used to be free. You just sort of disperse them, but now they're very costly. And the best idea our industry has is to just take this and shove it underground again. Many valuable things start out life as waste. In oil and gas, Vaseline and glycerol, two really valuable products, came from originally waste products. Lobster used to be a fertilizer. We would throw it on the farmers' fields in Maine. Our competitive context is changing. The aviation fuel market is going to grow 15% compounded for the next 25 years through your entire lifetime. But the top 6 sustainable aviation fuel companies aren't even from the hydrocarbon industry. They're brand new startups. In my lifetime, I've shown you the pictures. China has gone from coal-fired donkey carts to energy exporting superpower, from a resource buyer to an energy manufacturer. Our money is changing. Money really likes data. It's way more concerned with climate now, and it can't see investing too much past 2030. I mean, there'll still be 1 billion cars on the road in 2030. Where are we going to get the gas? And of course, our tools are changing. You might not know this. 60% of oil and gas companies started to adopt cloud computing during the pandemic. Prior to then, they weren't interested. And now they're adopting robots and augmented reality and artificial intelligence. The one ingredient that's common to all of this is data. Data truly is a new kind of oil. And what this tells us is the need to change our relationship with our data has never been more urgent. There is a huge prize awaiting the oil and gas business that rethinks its relationship to its data. And that prize is measured on 5 dimensions. First one is cost reduction. I was part of an IEA global benchmarking study on the impacts of digital on the energy industry. And the study concluded that a cost reduction prize of 20% awaits those who invest. So reduction in cost of the industry. That's throughout the whole value chain. Think about that. 20% is huge. Second is a productivity gain. In that same study, the IEA also forecasted that the productivity of all of the assets in the value chain, upstream, midstream, downstream, could capture a further 20% productivity boost. And the third is an emissions reduction. Now, the IEA didn't forecast anything here, but in a study in the US, this was from BP, British Petroleum, they found that they could reduce emissions by up to 70% in the field through digital innovation and digital adoption. Enormous prize. Next is young people, talent. Young people swipe left at energy. They're just not interested. The industry is at risk of not attracting its share of talent. I sit on the energy advisory board for a Calgary university called SAIT. And they still have a petroleum operations program for running the energized assets. But the entire class is foreign students. Canadians no longer apply to these jobs. Have you been to Calgary? So it's not that woke a place, and yet they're not taking on these jobs. And finally is business value. The big data companies, Apple, Amazon, and Alphabet, they trade at triple the value of oil companies, but they produce roughly the same level of profitability. That's a gap that we can close. And I can tell you, because of my exposure to the industry, no oil company has figured this out. And you can also tell, because no oil company's stock price has broken out from the masses and become differentiated. There is still time to make a difference. And I think this is where your careers come in when you get into industry, is how do you take full advantage of this opportunity and fix this issue for the sector? I've always maintained that fixing the relationship with data is going to be hard work. It's really, really, really hard. The fixes are not going to be easy. As I see it, these are the kinds of problems that you'll face when you get out into industry. These problems can be addressed. They're not insurmountable. They can be tackled. The first problem is that data, of course, isn't naturally all that inspiring. I mean, if we were in Las Vegas, I'd say sexy, because that describes the problem perfectly. Data's not very sexy. But this is Texas, and some of you might be armed, so we won't say sexy. Oil infrastructure actually appeals to base human senses. When you stand in front of an oil refinery, you kind of take in the immensity of it. You can touch a storage tank. You can smell crude oil and natural gas. You can hear a methane actuator out in the gas field, and your chest can feel the thump, thump, thump of a gas turbine. Energy engages the human senses in ways that data cannot. So there's the question. How do you make data fun, sexy, and attractive? Second problem, data is really unfriendly. I mean, it's a pain to deal with. I don't know if you've discovered this yet. You will. Working with our data in oil and gas is like having a really bad roommate with a weed habit, no self-grooming, and a hoarding fixation. It's all in time series, so the data sets are huge, and they're locked away on drives and tucked into silos with these weird naming conventions. You can't search anything because there's no consistent metadata. Ugh, swipe left. How do we make data easy? And third, we ignore data. It's really unappreciated for what it is and what it can do. For example, performance measures in oil and gas tend to point at many things, but data isn't one of them. The typical three measures in oil and gas are safety, reliability, and cost. That's it. Any employee in oil and gas, at the end of the year for their performance review, they can spin a story that says data is a waste of their time because they can't tie it back to these good data practices, back to these performance measures. Those are the challenges to overcome. So, raises the question, how do we become great at energy and data? Well, because of your studies, you're already going to be great at the energy part. Industry is too. And I'm assuming that if you all aspire to a great career and you end up becoming the next generation of managers, your job will include loving your data. And if you do, you will be well rewarded. Here's a 5-step plan you might want to take on board to become not just the energy superpower that you are going to be, but a data superpower. And the beauty of all of this is it requires very little capital. You don't need a ton of money. Step 1, you got to find the hidden data people. They're totally in plain sight in oil and gas. Spotting them with their job titles isn't that hard. You just have to look for people who have data in their name. Data scientist, data engineer, database admin. But beyond that, in oil and gas, companies have hired data-oriented people throughout their organizations. They're everywhere. They're toiling away on spreadsheets and databases typically. Managers, generally speaking, know who they are, and there's clues if you know where to look. I personally recommend to managers I deal with that they look for employees who are a little younger than average. These are the digital natives, people who have grown up, like you, with digital tools in hand. Many of our younger employees in oil and gas, maybe they're an operator, maybe they're in finance. They may have flirted with computer science or information systems in university, but couldn't make the commitment. Look for those who display what I call natural data talents. Every U.S. business I've ever been in has someone who's running a fantasy sports spreadsheet. It's all data, rows and columns and averages and numbers. Lots of people tracking and tracing family trees all the way back to George Washington. Anybody who plays with maps, subsurface, celestial maps, stargazing, these are the people with a data mindset. And then, of course, there's those who like to experiment with technologies, app developers, people fiddling around with drones on their spare time, or they tinker with digital tools like AI at work. They're the team. Oil and gas can't hire another team. We've got to work with the people we've got because the young people are not coming into the industry. So you got to find them. They're hidden in the organizations today. Next, have to raise the data acumen for everyone in oil and gas. The vast majority of people you'll work with in oil and gas have not had much data training, if any at all. The education system's never geared for this. Data know-how wasn't even on the syllabus in most engineering degrees. 24 months ago, I surveyed all of the top petroleum companies in North America, so Canada and the United States, looking at the engineering programs, undergraduate level. Not one of them had a mandatory data class. 24 months ago. I'm working with a university right now and to fix their digital program for finance professionals. It's taking us years to fix this, years, because of the way the education system works. Definition of the syllabus, getting it approved, getting it certified. We can't wait that long. My counsel to oil and gas is you need to do stuff like set up data boot camps, maybe with a lot less yelling at people and more of the analytics, but still a boot camp. Next, you got to transform your people, your teams into citizen data scientists. And a great example here is Petronas in Malaysia, of all places. They put thousands of their employees through data training so that they create what they think of as data ninjas by the thousands. Next, how do we make data sexy? How do we make data matter? It's a pretty nerdy, narrow topic, not very appealing. How do we juice it up here? Well, when you become a leader or manager with a team, and many of you will really quickly, here are 4 things you can do to make data matter. Make it cool. First thing you can do is just say it. Just state your belief that data is important. Make it part of your vision for your work. I like the example from Jupiter Resources. Their mission statement said that data was their most important asset. Once you state it, a whole lot of what I call bad data behavior becomes unacceptable. Next, you have to organize for it. You got to enlist someone with real clout in the organization to carry the flag for data, some corporate champion. This has to be someone at the management table, executive table. And it can't be IT. It needs someone with real stroke, like real power, part of the executive team. And that usually means somebody out of operations. So you got to organize for it. And next, of course, is what I call the golden rule. Resources, money. Because let's be real, in the corporate world, cash is king. So you got to work on securing a budget that you can spend on data. Money to go to trade shows, for example, because nothing says I love you quite like a dedicated budget line item. And last, the big one, recognition. Data people have to be made to feel important and welcome, and they've got to be recognized and celebrated and spotlighted for their success. Most oil and gas companies, you'll discover, if you haven't already, start most meetings with a safety moment. What this is intended to do is drive home the importance of safety, that it's everyone's business. Well, why not have an occasional data minute? Surface a data win. Talk about a good data practice. Talk about a horrible data failure. This way, data is not disappears into the background, but becomes part of the conversation, becomes central to work. Number 4, metrics. You have to adapt the performance metrics. Our industry, as I mentioned earlier, runs on the basic 3: safety, do no harm to people, the environment, or the equipment; reliability, produce the volumes you said you were going to produce, because after all, you can't control the price, you can only produce the volume; and cost. Hit the cost targets, because we can't pass cost increases on to the customers because of the commodity market structure. Nothing motivates change more than having a specific goal to hit in industry. So you have to incorporate some kind of performance measure into measure the metrics related to data. One company I know requires that every manager who has a budget more than $2 million to spend on improvements, and that's not that much in oil and gas, they are required to spend something on data. You could create a scorecard of business gains that come from data capture and data gains. Repsol, big Spanish concern, they build into their business plan specific financial targets related to data initiatives. Inevitably, if there's a need to cut back for the year, these initiatives rarely get cut because they're tied directly to financial returns. And fifth and finally, you have to figure out how to exploit data's two superpowers. Data is subject to 2 laws that govern the data world. Now, I need to know if you've ever heard of Moore's Law. Ever heard of Moore's Law? Yep. Yeah, so Moore's Law. It's named after Roger Moore, of course. He was the 7 times James Bond actor, poster child for cinematic misogyny. That guy? I'm kidding, of course. It was named after Gordon Moore, who was the CEO of Intel. Moore's Law holds that over time, some things show an exponential rate of change, and that is absolutely happening to data. In business terms, this is the equivalent of a 40% compounded annual growth rate. That's a phenomenal growth rate, especially when it's year on year on year, and it's been doing this for 4 decades. Now, have you ever heard of Metcalfe's Law? Anybody heard of Metcalfe's Law? Yeah, he's probably not as common as a kind of a character out there, but Robert Metcalfe studied the value of networks as part of the UK privatization of British Telecom many, many years ago under Margaret Thatcher. His law states that the value of a network is n squared, where n is the number of nodes on the network. This is the magic formula. How do you create a useful set of data? It's generated by sensors, interpreted by algorithms or AI, and then automation or robots apply that data to do real work. What does that look like? If you connect multiple instances of n in a network for Metcalfe, and then you grow n at 40% per year for Moore, you have a phenomenal business. The question is, for you, when you get out into industry, what is your N? Find your N, and you find fame and fortune. I want to conclude by sharing a story with you. This story relates to a friend of mine, Esther Caldwell, who is shown here. She was one of my employees many years ago. She was one of those very rare people, right? Lots of extraordinary accomplishment. For example, she's climbed to the top of the tallest mountain on every continent. And yes, that includes Mount Everest, which is the photograph she shared with me here. Esther and I used to go hiking in the Rocky Mountains. It's very intimidating when someone who has stood on the top of Mount Everest says, "Hey, let's go hiking." I asked her once how she convinced people to go climb a mountain with her, even on a hike. I mean, you're walking relentlessly uphill, you're carrying all your food and your water, you're beating off mosquitoes, you're getting burnt by the sun, you run into bears and forest fires, and yes, all of those things happened to me hiking with Esther. And for what? Most of the hike's pretty pointless. You're just in the trees. Well, Esther said this: you never, tell people how hard the journey is going to be, all the risks and all the costs. They'll never come with you. Instead, you tell them about the view from the top. When you're on the top of Mount Everest, you can see that the Earth is actually round. The jet stream is below you. The stars don't twinkle because there's no atmosphere. And you can see for over 150 miles. That's the distance between Austin and Houston. Imagine being able to look down on Houston from Austin. Well, most of you probably already do that anyway. But next time you embark on a change journey, sell your companions on the magnificence of the destination. It can make all the difference. I love oil. So do you. We all live like pharaohs because of oil. But we have to be clear, data is the new crude oil. It's here in abundance. Oil and gas has what I call a 5-star opportunity: cost, productivity, emissions, talent, and value, if it can change its mindset to be oil and data. And we absolutely can do this if we try.